All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and unpack the highly classified training methods that took skinny Soviet athletes and turned them into absolute, unstoppable forces. Look, the Soviet Union produced some of the most incredibly dominant wrestlers, soldiers, and athletes the world has literally ever seen. But here's the thing, they didn't do it by just slapping massive plates on a barbell and hoping for the best. No way. They had a system. It was a highly specific, fiercely effective blueprint that completely reimagined how the human body builds and actually sustains power.
Here's the roadmap for how we're going to build this blueprint out, pillar by pillar. First up, the Soviet strength philosophy. Then, forging steel tendons, followed by the kettlebell complex. After that, we'll hit greasing the groove, active recovery, and finally, fueling the machine. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The Soviet Strength Philosophy. Strength Reimagined.
Now, I really want you to look at this number. 62. That is the number of Olympic gold medals snatched up by Soviet wrestlers in just 9 appearances. 9! To put that into perspective, the US has been at this for over a century and still hasn't touched that specific record. So obviously this wasn't just some lucky streak, right? This was the result of a crazy, deliberate, highly calculated methodology.
And this right here perfectly illustrates that philosophical shift. Think about your typical modern gym goer, maybe a bodybuilder type who can bench 315 and squat 500. On paper, absolutely massive strength, but they train flat on their back, fully supported by a padded bench, basically just chasing that one peak repetition. Now, contrast that with the Soviet wrestler. They train to move, to fight, literally to survive. They're building this gritty, enduring strength that lasts even when they're totally exhausted, constantly having to stabilize their own body at weird, constantly changing angles. The Soviet coaches basically asked themselves one simple question. What if the human body is the absolute only piece of equipment you'll ever actually need?
Which brings us to Section 2. Forging steel tendons. And spoiler alert, no barbells needed.
Okay, so the secret sauce here is a concept they called linkage. You know how gym machines completely isolate your muscles? Well, the Soviets threw that idea completely out the window. They knew the body had to act as one unbreakable chain. And to build this, they used absolutely brutal bodyweight moves like the wrestler's bridge. Imagine this, you plant your feet, push your hips to the sky, and literally roll back onto the top of your head. If your neck starts shaking and every single muscle from your glutes up to your spine is just screaming, yeah, you're doing it right. It takes a glaring weak point like the neck and turns it into total armor. This linkage idea is exactly how guys like Alexander Karelin, a 130-kilo behemoth of a wrestler, could casually do a standing backflip and stay undefeated for 13 solid years. So before these athletes even looked at a weight, they had to master this agonizing bodyweight arsenal. We're talking doing 500 deep squats a day. Just let that sink in. 500. It built just insane, unshakable endurance. They did sweeping Hindu push-ups to mimic real, unsupported physical struggles, bear crawls and duck walks for positional strength. They even threw literal towels over pull-up bars to develop this crushing, vice-like grip strength, and finished it all off with pistol squats to make their legs totally bulletproof.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would they do so many reps? Well, here's the biology behind it. When you lift super heavy weights, your muscles bulk up fast, sure, but your tendons? They get left behind. They stay like fragile little rubber bands that stretch, waste your energy, and eventually just snap under a heavy load. But by pumping out high-rep bodyweight movements instead of massive weights, the Soviets literally rewired their biology. Over months, those tendons thickened up and stiffened. They turned their tendons into what are basically steel cables. With steel cables, absolutely zero force gets lost. Force goes in, force comes straight out.
All right, Section 3. The kettlebell complex, the ultimate weapon.
Once that bodyweight foundation was rock solid, they brought out the big guns, the kettlebell. If you're busy, and hey, I'm busy, we're all busy, right? This exact 5-step, 20-minute sequence hits literally every single muscle in your body. Okay, picture this. You start with 4 push-ups, but your hands are balancing right on the bells. Then, boom, immediately into 4 rows for your back and grip. Next, 4 explosive cleans. Then you rack them at your chest for 4 deep front squats to completely light up your core and legs. And finally, you finish the round with 12 explosive double kettlebell swings to hammer your hamstrings, glutes, and lower back. This is the kind of real-world functional strength that actually lets you lift heavy furniture without totally throwing your back out.
But be warned, my friends, this is absolutely cardio disguised as strength training. This whole routine will light your core on fire without you ever having to do a single crunch. Busting out hundreds of these explosive swings or snatches will send your heart rate straight through the roof. It builds up an absolute engine in your heart and lungs, all while teaching your entire body to fire together as one massive, unified machine.
Moving on to Section 4, Greasing the Groove. Strength is a skill.
So, most of us have been taught that getting stronger means pushing yourself to total muscle-shaking failure. Well, not the Soviets. They treated strength totally differently, using a technique they called greasing the groove. Think about it like practicing a basketball free throw. You don't shoot hoops until your arms literally fall off, right? You practice perfect form over and over while you're fresh. The Soviets did the exact same thing with strength. A soldier might drop down and do 5 push-ups at 8 a.m., then 5 more at 9 a.m., 5 at 10 a.m., and so on. By practicing the movements lightly throughout the day, they were actually training their brain's electrical signals to fire faster and recruit way more muscle fibers all at once. Same exact muscles, but vastly more strength. They also paired this with something called wave loading. Look, these athletes were training 6, sometimes 7 days a week, but they survived it by constantly alternating their intensity. One day would be an absolute maximum effort, heavy training grind, but the very next day, a light day, minimum effort, just some light running, maybe some basic gymnastics, purely to wake up the nervous system and get the blood flowing. This constant up and down modulation is the secret sauce that allowed them to handle unbelievable training volumes without completely breaking down.
Which naturally leads us to Section 5, Active Recovery, Healing like a Soviet.
Now, this philosophy right here, it is absolutely crucial. Read it with me. Training doesn't make you stronger. Training plus recovery makes you stronger. Let that sink in for a second. The Soviets figured out pretty quickly that just sitting around on the couch on your rest day actually slows the whole healing process down because your blood stops pumping freely. So instead of being couch potatoes, they forced their bodies to adapt using these extremely active, highly specific healing protocols.
And the recovery tools? Oh, they were legendary. They used extreme sonic contrasts. We're talking sitting in intense heat to dilate those blood vessels and then immediately plunging into ice-cold water to completely flush out the lactic acid. They used something called venic, which literally involves beating the skin with birch branches to physically stimulate blood flow. I know, it sounds wild, but it worked. They always stayed active on their off days with some light swimming or basketball. And they even used adaptogenic herbs like rhodiola, which has been proven to drop your stress hormones and keep your muscles from breaking down.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Fueling the Machine, Premium Soviet Fuel.
Look, you simply cannot build a machine like this without premium fuel. But the Soviet nutrition method wasn't about obsessively counting calories. It was about eating real, heavy-duty food that basically acted like a performance enhancer. First up, the kasha principle. They used buckwheat as the base for their meals. It's low glycemic, meaning it gives you the steady, non-crashing energy, plus it's packed with magnesium and iron. Second, tworog. This is basically a heavy casein-packed cottage cheese or curd that they would eat right before bed. Why? Because it gave their recovering muscles a slow, steady drip of protein all night long while they slept. And third, high volume. They were eating absolutely massive meals, but strategically placing them right after their most brutal training sessions, exactly when their bodies were just starving for nutrients.
Because really, that is the ultimate goal here, isn't it? To build a body that simply does not break down. By weaving together steel cable tendons from bodyweight mastery, hacking their nervous systems by greasing the groove, surviving those explosive kettlebell complexes, and backing it all up with elite, science-backed recovery and nutrition, they built bodies that were quite literally engineered to survive absolutely anything you could throw at them. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this question. Which specific element of this indestructible Soviet blueprint are you going to weave into your own routine today? Are you going to grab a towel and start working on that crushing pull-up grip? Are you going to start greasing the groove by knocking out 5 easy push-ups every hour while you're at your desk? Or are you actually brave enough to tackle that brutal 20-minute kettlebell complex? Seriously, what is your very first step going to be toward becoming truly indestructible?